Hey dum-dums, if I were to rank things in my life that quite honestly I never think about, but somehow manage to scavenge whatever they can from my monthly income, Spotify would rock it to the absolute top of that list. I swear the only reason it's stayed in my life up to this point is because of my deep-rooted fear of one day being past the aux and hearing this noise blare out loud.
Want a break from the ads?
Truly harrowing. The simple convenience of wanting to listen to a song and not feeling like you're minutes away from being exiled from the group chat has ensured that this silly little app has sort of become a commodity in my life, along with food, water, heating, and my crippling addiction to playing Stardew Valley until the cold dead hours of the morning. Who else is going to tend to my pumpkins? In a way, how I feel about Spotify sort of mirrors my relationship towards Subway after a night out. In the moment, it may seem like an absolute no-brainer when you're stumbling out of the club, Mr. Brightside still ringing in your ears and all manner of shockingly sticky substances attached to your entire body. But we all know it is absolutely a marriage of convenience. Because when you stop to consider what's going on in there and you make the conscious decision to look behind the counter, you start to realise that this place sucks. If there were a better place to be right now, none of us would be here sobbing into a garlic cheesesteak at 4 AM. Am I right, people? That's definitely a made-up story with no real-life implications. Although the initial idea for this video may have started as a rather innocuous inquiry into an innocent little app, this video took over my life. What is happening? So if you can, put your feet up, get cozy, grab a stress ball and have some snacks at the ready. As for the next hour and a bit, I'm going to be taking you on a mystical journey into this musical pit of despair. One that's seemingly filled to the brim with AI nonsense, royal hijinks, content theft, artist exploitation, and underhand dealings that are not dodgy or manipulative in any sense of the imagination. Don't sue me, please. As we come face to face with a truly grisly realization. Maybe this big multi-billion-dollar company doesn't have our best interests at heart. What a shock.
Even more revenue will come back to the music industry. So I'm positive that the entire music industry is going to be a lot bigger and a lot more healthier than it's ever been.
Spotify is slashing 1,500 jobs. That's about 1 in 6 employees.
The music and podcast giant Spotify is raising its prices for its 200 million subscribers for the first time in over a decade.
Because it really has been spotty for Spotify when it comes to making money consistently quarter after quarter.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the radio audience.
I've always found it strange how quickly our relationships towards entire mediums can be so easily manipulated and warped by the decisions of a select few. With each of those nameless individuals constantly affirming that their way forward is the truest path until some new idiot comes into frame and the cycle continues anew. If you've somehow been living under a rock for the past 20 years and you're not familiar with this 3 bars a signal looking app, what are you doing here? Who do you think I am? Do I look like a web browser? Do I sound like Ask Jeeves? Don't say that I do. From meandering in Scandinavian obscurity to your grandmother listening to Lil Uzi Vert, Spotify and the concept of music streamers as a whole, whether we like it or not, have irreversibly changed the way we not only consume but think about music as a medium. Long gone are the days of frantically fumbling one of these bad boys out of their incredibly annoying cases so you can listen to Mambo No. 5 on repeat for the 9th time in a row. Thanks to music streamers like Spotify, in a single afternoon you can now go from listening to the entire discography of 15 different artists, hearing them evolve and adapt as they pour their heart and soul into each and every performance, to whacking on Crazy Frog at full volume whilst you're ripping it down the motorway to get a McFlurry. I'm sorry, I mean when I'm going at a totally respectable speed down the motorway to get a McFlurry. Trust me, officer, the Crazy Frog told me to go bing bing. He told me to go bing bing. You see, as a tiny little British lad plonked in the middle of nowhere, it may shock you to hear that my entire childhood wasn't completely devoid of joy. We did actually have access to music growing up. The music of the Industrial Revolution echoing in the background as we shine shoes for loose threepennies. And by that I obviously mean Tiny Henry hunkering down in front of one of those big bunda computers so he can load the entirety of the High School Musical soundtrack and Black Eyed Peas' Elefunk onto his iPod Shuffle before he missed the school bus. We've all been there. But now almost all of the songs that I listen to on one of the 2 playlists that I constantly have on repeat have directly been fed into there from the almighty Spotify algorithm. And the last time I bought a physical piece of music was this bad boy, and that came out in 2010. Is that bad? That feels bad? How did I get here? Well, whilst Tiny Henry was busy getting his head in the game and finding out where is the love, over in Stockholm 2 Swedish entrepreneurs called Martin Lorenz Lawrence and Daniel Ek, unwittingly let loose a series of dominoes that would eventually lead to the slow death crawl of the music industry as we know it, by founding the music streaming platform Spotify on the 23rd of April 2006. Whoopsie, I guess. I know at this point it's an incredibly common thing to hear that Spotify is truly terrible and exploitative and that it doesn't respect or look after the artists that made it relevant. But oh my days, up until looking into this thing, I had no idea how bad it was. Take for instance the two Donnies that helm this thing, who wouldn't look out of place playing the villains in a straight-to-TV Christmas movie from the early 2000s. So little is known about either of these two men that the Wikipedia entry for the Monster Mash is more in depth than both of theirs combined. Just to give you a summary of how fantastic both of these individuals are, I'm going to tell you a little festive story. As reported by Ryan Hogg in Fortune, after letting go 1,500 employees in December of last year, Daniel Ek was reportedly shocked at how much harder day-to-day working was without them. Oh well, I'm sure right now is the perfect time to announce that our Chief Financial Officer is cashing out almost $9 million in shares 3 months before leaving the company. I'm sure that sits well with those employees. This is only made more impressive when you realise it's from the same man that said this and this. This is the man who is in charge of the largest music streamer in the world. The man who has irreversibly ruined the very industry he works in. I don't know why I'm so shocked about this. This has all the nous and sincerity you'd expect from a man who's named after the sound you make when you have terrifically violent food poisoning. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Let's address the obvious elephant in the room before we go any further. Hey Henry, when's the job interview? Yeah, good one. Are you going on jury duty? Right. Did you lose custody of the kids in court? That's probably good enough. This is why I don't do acting. But in full sincerity, I'm looking like this because I need to feel respected. I'm taking something seriously for once. Because throughout the rest of this video, we're going to be covering a bunch of heavy things that actually impact the lives of millions of people across the globe. So for once, I'm not going to be the overly sarcastic and quippy Henry that you're all used to. This is a new Henry. A serious Henry. With that being said, let's take a critical, unbiased look at this silly little application as we collectively and diplomatically come to understand it. Let's get festive. Even though Spotify is undoubtedly the most successful and popular music streamer in the world right now, racking up 640 million monthly active users, it is unbelievably shocking just how shoddy the foundations this titanic, nudge nudge, wink wink empire was built upon. Since its creation in 2009, Spotify has failed to consistently turn a profit. I say consistently, they failed to turn a profit in general. I mean, that one's my favourite. What the hell happened in 2017? In fact, since 2009, this musical wonderland has lost 4.2 billion euros, and its only profitable year is the one we are in right now. So surely everything's on the up and up. No. You'd be very wrong. But in order to get into the nitty-gritty of this, I feel like I need some help, because even though I was in the most impactful rock band in the West Midlands in the early 2000s, I mean, look at the size of that bass guitar. You could tell I knew what I was doing. My knowledge of the music industry is limited at best. Just to give you a general idea on what my musical talent is, I play Guitar Hero on medium. That should tell you all you need to know. So it's time to bring in someone with actual knowledge, credibility and talent in the music industry. This is Jack Ferry, one of my friends from high school, and as well as being an incredibly gifted musician whose music you are listening to right now and you should go and listen to in any way that you can. I mean, he's got a song out as of talking about this and it is linked in the description. Jack also has the nice little added bonus of working in a role where he actively looks into the data of artists on Spotify. So for once, you don't just have to trust one British man waffling into a camera in front of a green screen. You've got two! It's a Christmas miracle!
Hi, I'm Jack Ferry, childhood friend of Henry Lewis and also a working musician. Spotify is a really interesting thing. It is the most helpful way that musicians can be listened to and discovered these days, but also it's pretty tricky to kind of navigate the best practices and how you get on with everything. So Henry roped me in to help explain everything to you. So the way Spotify pays its artists is kind of shrouded in mystery, but there's a pretty simple explanation. Spotify has a big pool of money gathered from all its subscribers and all the ad revenue it makes. People aren't paid out on a, for example, bit of money per stream thing. Rather, it's a combination of how many streams you're getting, what location in the world the streams are coming from, where it's been playlisted, and a number of other things. In the current market of music and obtaining fans through Spotify, playlisting is just the top don. You cannot overestimate how important playlisting is. Like, it is the be all and end all. It is the kill or be killed. It is where indie musicians get their wings and ascend upwards.
All of this is mental. The inherent value of an individual's work shouldn't be dependent upon whether someone else has been performing better than them. In any other line of work, that would be pure insanity. Compare this to somewhere like, well, YouTube. YouTube pays creators based on a rate they get for every 1,000 views, and whilst that rate may change depending on what day it is, how long the video is, or what the video's about, crucially, YouTube does not pay you based on the performance of another video. If YouTube paid me less because Skibbity Toilet got more views than me, that would be psychotic. The idea of taking money from the total pool of ad revenue and dishing it out depending on how many streams you received seems super cool in theory, but we don't live in theory. At least I don't think I do. How do you even know if you lived in theory? What if this was all made up in the mind of me after I nearly died choking on a Kinder Egg in the early 2000s? Did you hear that? Because the music I used in the background there, you're about to become very familiar with it. The rise in demand for lo-fi white background and ambient noise tracks over the last few years has been staggering to say the least, allowing for some videos of wet leaves rattling about in a storm to rack up well over 90 million views. Lad, I live in Britain. If I currently look out of my window, I can see that exact thing happening right now. It's such a prevalent industry at this point that many massive tech companies have started to take note, such as Apple, who have baked background noises into your phone's accessibility settings. But even with that, hundreds of thousands of people consistently tune in every day to the same lo-fi live streams, watching the same girl with the same cat studying for a test that they never take, so they can continue to get through and focus on monotonous everyday tasks. Or like this chatter really get in their feels, I guess. Should I be saying this? However, this phenomenon doesn't only extend to the worlds of YouTube. Spotify is absolutely rife with this stuff, with thousands upon thousands of tracks dedicated to things like studying, relaxation, guided meditation, and EMDR bilateral stimulation 10 plus hours continuous for healing, peace, sleep and relaxation. Rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? My eyes. Even though on YouTube this has always been a surefire get-rich-quick scheme that all the YouTube gurus recommend to do, that is, until YouTube actively put a stop to it, Spotify, however, hasn't been as forward-thinking. You could say they encourage it. As stated by Harvard Schilberg and Hendrik Spilker in their article published in Popular Music and Society in March of last year, large selections of tracks which do not contain tones, melodies, rhythms, or any other musical features occupy large parts of Spotify's playlists, gathering millions of streams and consequently massive shares of Spotify's pro-rata based royalty payments. Basically, this means that even though musicians may toil for months, maybe even years, on a single track that speaks to the heart of the human condition, some Donny can whack their head out of the window in the middle of a hailstorm, and both tracks would be valued by Spotify as the same. It makes sense now why Spotify co-founder and CEO Daniel Ek once said that you can't record music every 1 to 3 years and think that that's going to be enough. It's about putting the work in. Yeah, Danny boy, I'm sure it is. But you are the reason for this, my man. You created the bed that artists and musicians lie in, yet you are standing there mocking your own shoddy workmanship. It's like Spotify saw the outcome of the Three Little Pigs and thought, you know what, these guys, they didn't cut corners enough. They didn't even try building a house out of wet rags and broken dreams. And then somehow they plonked a multi-billion-dollar empire on top of it. We are all completely aware that this thing is not stable. We're all just sitting by and waiting for the big bad wolf to show up and topple this bad boy. Just go into any relaxation or study playlist and just look at the sheer number of streams that are being racked up there. Although individually these tracks may come nowhere near close to musical titans like Jungkook, Taylor Swift, Charlie XCX and Jack Ferry, collectively these artists continue to hoover up sizable chunks of wealth that should be going to artists that actually deserve it. What makes this whole situation all the more beastly and nefarious is that unlike many of the other tracks listed on Spotify, these things aren't owned by many major labels and distributors, with a lot of them actually falling under the category of royalty-free music, while others may have been created and produced in-house by Spotify themselves. So although these tracks continue to rack up crazy streams, Spotify does not have to pay them as much as they would if an artist had got that same amount of streams. That is crazy. We all know this type of music is intended to be whacked on in the background at 4 a.m. whilst you're doing some knitting or crushing some nerds on Fortnite. We've all been there. But the fact that more and more users are leaving these tracks on for longer and longer periods of time ensures that the listening time for ad-supported users on their ad-supported service is increased. So the more content that they stream under the ad-supported service, the more advertising inventory Spotify get to sell. Don't believe me? Well, what I said was a direct quote from Spotify's 2018 SEC Form F1 registration under the Securities Act of 1993. Which was a document that Spotify had to file in order to go public in that same year. I hope you could tell by the fact that I would not say the phrase advertising inventory of my own free will. You totally thought I said that, didn't you? I need to reevaluate my self-image. They want us listening on their platform, consuming their content for as long as physically possible, even if it means others have to suffer in the long run. Because as I've hinted at, a byproduct of this is that smaller, lesser known independent artists receive less. With this really getting hammered home when you see this article from Ashley King for Digital Music News in March of 2021, where they calculated that in order to earn a minimum wage as a musician, you would need anywhere from 2.8 million streams if you were living in Idaho, Georgia or Texas, all the way up to 5.4 million a year in LA or 5.8 million a year in Washington DC. In 2000, any of those numbers would have comfortably put you in the top selling albums of the entire decade.
In 2006, the music industry was collapsing. Piracy was killing it. The idea that all music should be free for the taking, no matter the cost and effort, destroyed the careers of a lot of working artists. We believed there had to be a better way, so we founded Spotify.
And yes, I know this isn't exactly a Spotify-centric problem. All of the other music streamers operate on a similar payment structure, and that if we really want to get into the weeds of it, we should really be angry with the record labels, like they are the true villains of this story. This is why so many artists have come out so vehemently against the way this system works.
Do you see anything in your future where we might get a raise directly from you?
Swift's new album 1989 has already sold 1.3 million copies. Streamed, Swift makes $175,000 versus the $10 million she makes selling it on iTunes for $12.99 an album.
I know you haven't always loved the internet. How are you seeing progress right now with all of that?
It's a double-edged sword, you know. A lot of artists aren't getting paid full scale for their art, and the internet, because of downloading and things like that, is kind of like a black hole, and it's hard to audit, it's hard to get accounting, and it's not that it's just about the money, but it's about justice and fairness. And when people say that they love you and they respect you, but at the same time take, 80% of your earnings, then expect you to fix your own communities, that's the sharp part of the sword.
But what makes this all the more infuriating is these tracks aren't just getting streams because of random flukes in the algorithm. Spotify are actively pushing, promoting, and even creating these things. All of these tracks are in Spotify created and verified playlists. It's not even like that they can plead ignorance. They are a multi-billion-dollar company. They know what these things are, what they're doing, and how they're manipulating the system, and Spotify continues to push them, simply because it saved them money. You see, I said saved there because at the end of last year, Spotify did eventually make a change to the way these things were valued. But as Elias Light reported in Billboard, it wasn't because of angry fans, pressure from artists, or because they grew a conscience. The reason this happened was because they got outed in public by the CEO of Warner Music Group, one of the big three major labels with 16% market share, who without them Spotify would be reduced to a burning pile of garbage on the side of the road. The label saw that Spotify were finally starting to earn some income on their own and understandably got a little bit upset. But do you understand how much of an idiot you have to be that I have started to agree with record label executives? Historically, some of the worst people in not only the music industry, but any industry. It makes more sense now that seemingly every decision Spotify has ever made is never in the interest of the artists who populate their platform. Every single time it's about ensuring that their bottom line is propped up, and every record label executive can sleep soundly at night knowing that every artist that isn't Taylor Swift is struggling to buy a cheese toastie. Another absolutely prime example of this exact thing is Spotify Discovery Mode, where artists can forego a small portion of their owed royalties in order to get more favourable placements within the algorithm. And while Spotify may continually state that Discovery Mode can help drive longer-term fan base growth, showing us Discovery Mode success stories, and how artists see a 50% increase in saves, a 44% in playlist ads, and 37% increase in follows during the first month. This feature has been rightfully panned by artists and independent labels all over the gaff for the absolutely shoddy precedent this thing is setting. Eck and Lorentzen both know how crucial it could be for an up-and-coming artist to find themselves placed on one of Spotify's most curated and listened to playlists, and how it could change the course of their life overnight. So musicians would understandably do whatever they could to potentially have a shot at this life-changing opportunity, even if that means they will suffer in the short term. But in the long run, this could set in motion a race to the bottom, in which artists and labels feel compelled to accept lower and lower royalty rates as a necessary way to break through an extremely crowded and competitive music environment. Don't believe me? Well, I've done it again! Those words were taken verbatim from a letter written to Daniel Ek in 2022 that was obtained by Variety, from 3 members of Congress who called Spotify's Discovery Mode a classic prisoner's dilemma. Because when I think of potential ways to help small and upcoming artists, I eventually want my idea to be compared to a philosophical thought experiment in which people potentially betray one another for individual gain. Spotify, you dogs, you've done it again. If artists suddenly begin to accept lower royalties, these lowered royalties would then become the new norm. And it wouldn't surprise me if after that, Spotify then introduced an exclusive Discovery Mode that lowered the royalties even more. It also isn't unbelievably shocking to me that this is the first year that Spotify has potentially made a profit, especially when you see that, as Billboard reported in last year, which means 2024 is the first full year with more artists than ever actively using Discovery Mode. Add that to the fact that they sacked 17% of their workforce, and of course they made a profit. You can see now why I said that this video consumed my life. It's just so many different shenanigans. Every time I would learn about something awful that the record labels or Spotify had done, I would go to look into it more, and in the process of looking into it, I would find another terrible thing, which would cause me to look into that more, and I would find another terrible thing, and then I would realise that it's been 2 months that I started making this, and I haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. So, now that Spotify's golden plan to finally make some money for once had gone up in smoke before it even started, surely they had some other buns in the oven that they could get past those sneaky record label executives. Surely it wasn't like every decision that Spotify has ever made was the worst possible decision that you could make in every single moment, right? Right? So I've got a little bit of a problem. I can't stop playing this game. As we're getting closer to that special festive time of year when we're spending time around our families and the ones that we love, I thought I'd use a recipe passed throughout generations to get us in the festive spirit, and definitely not one I found on Google moments before the cameras went live. Today we're going to be making a traditional British staple that I've inhaled far too much in my life: mince pies, as we'll be working our way through Spotify and the great podcast gamble. Just like a reaction YouTuber who needs rent money, Spotify were in the unenviable position of relying upon the work of others to actually generate any form of meaningful income. But after years of consistent losses, thanks to too many people taking pieces from the top, they made a collective decision to steal someone else's hard work instead. There's going to be so many bakers and chefs. They're going to be like, you are terrible at this. Rather than taking whatever they could get their hands on from the back pockets of record labels, Spotify sought to find a new industry, a new type of audio-visual content to dominate for themselves. And after mere minutes of brainstorming, settled on podcasts. In the grand scheme of the internet, this medium hasn't been around for too long, shown by the fact that both Nyan Cat and Numa Numa were both released beforehand. It wasn't really until the explosion of shows like Fresh Air, This American Life, and obviously the absolute dominance of true crime narrative works like the Peabody Award-winning Serial, hosted by Sarah Koenig, which rocketed to fame in 2014 and 15, that caused podcasts to become known en masse, finally giving audiences a new way of listening to narrative non-fiction that was previously only being realised by listening to your grandparents dishing on all the neighbourhood gossip. While Spotify had been nurturing this idea for several years, hiring the best talent they could to realise their vision, it wasn't until 2019 that they really started to kick this idea into hyperdrive. Their grand plan was to make calculated investments, purchasing well-known podcast studios, personalities and media companies so they would explode onto the scene with a sizable audience, and could inevitably overtake Apple as the dominant force in podcasting. And it worked. Almost instantly, as in 2021, Spotify overtook Apple as the largest podcasting platform in the United States. From there, they would go on to endure unforeseeable growth, signing multiple big-name celebrities like Kim Kardashian West, Alex Cooper, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and of course, Joe Rogan, ensuring they would become the dominant force in the industry for many years to come. Can you smell that? I think it's clear to say that this gamble clearly paid off. Where are my mince pies? What the fuck, Greg? Just as that horrendous looking man who looked shockingly similar to me was getting at, it was written in the stars for Spotify's era-defying dominance of the podcast space. So what happened? How did they lose $1 billion? Well, as I mean the other man, briefly mentioned, one of Spotify's main aims when entering the podcast space was to spend as much money as physically possible as fast as they could. This was not only in a collective effort to burst onto the scene and catch everybody by surprise, but more so that they would come into the game with established podcasts under their umbrella, each of which coming with their own dedicated existing audiences. And if that wasn't enough, there were all these new ones helmed by super cool celebrities to keep viewers listening on their platform for longer. But here's the catch. It isn't 1995 anymore. I'm not knocking any of the artists that they chose here, but I would just like to say that a vast portion of them didn't get to where they are in the world because of their linguistic skills. So the fact that Spotify thought they could make an engaging audio-visual experience is baffling. It's for that exact same reason why I'll never have a podcast. You all listen to me far too much as it is. Now, this decision was mainly up to the Chief Content Officer, Dawn Ostroff, who was more known for their work on traditional television with shows like Gossip Girl and Vampire Diaries. And this isn't to say that Dawn made a big error and this is entirely their fault, but I would just like to say, in order to show how potentially successful this strategy was for Spotify, you can tell by the fact that, she does not work for Spotify anymore. The most mind-boggling thing about all of this isn't that it wasn't a first-of-its-kind mistake that nobody could have foreseen. The exact same thing happened on this platform, like 5 years ago. Although some continue to be successful, most of the celebrities who jumped aboard the YouTube bandwagon have given up entirely, turning their channels into promotional vehicles for upcoming releases and every blue moon uploading an 8-minute vlog so they can stay relatable. The main reason being is that it was a lot harder than a lot of them expected. Or to put it another way, in the words of the CEO of the United Talent Agency, just because you're famous doesn't make you automatically good at something. Because, yeah, obviously, if I was setting up a hospital, I wouldn't spend all my money on Addison Rae and Kim Kardashian. I don't even think they work on Grey's Anatomy. As said in this article on Semaphore by Max Tanney, which is super good and goes into this whole situation way more in depth, and as always will be in the description and linked somewhere around here. Michelle Obama, TikTok star Addison Rae, and Kim Kardashian's podcasts were initially successful, but users stopped turning up after a few episodes, which made this entire strategy so much more cataclysmic. In an ideal world, every single one of these shows would have been absolute home runs, but the fact that they were all absolutely stinking up the gaff and Spotify had spent tens of millions of dollars ensuring that these people would stay on their platform, why would any of these celebrities have any incentives to make the podcast more engaging or enticing for its audience, especially if some of their most die-hard fans had already called it quits? No more is this epitomised with the situation surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan. Is he still a prince? I'm British and I don't even know that. Initially, they were thought to be one of the most precious jewels in Spotify's podcasting empire when they signed on for their exclusive $20 million deal mere months after leaving the land I call home, with anticipation rising for the eventual tell-all of what was at the time one of the most talked about news stories of the entire decade.
Wait, people cannot stop talking about this.
Rena, this is so huge, I hardly even know where to begin.
And they've eventually cut ties with the streaming platform. And if any of you out there aren't as familiar with monarchy speakers, I am. I mean, just listen to how I sound. It actually translates to them having the work ethic that you would expect from someone from the royal family. Sweet fuck all.
I see that Spotify have dumped, and I can't imagine why, because it was just such riveting audio.
Apparently it did rate well amongst some audiences, but...
I can tell you exactly who it would have rated well amongst, but yeah.
In the entire span of their podcasting career with Spotify, Meghan and Harry, mainly Meghan because Harry did nothing, produced 14 episodes. 14! In total, amounting to a whopping 12 hours, 29 minutes and 58 seconds worth of content. Or roughly $26,666 per minute, or $444 per second. For 12 hours of content! This is up there for me in terms of the things that I actually respect from the royal family. That and the fact that Prince William supports the same football team as me. But that's it. Rather than the immediate long-lasting success that they wanted, they would have seen more long-lasting returns with a penny arcade. But this wasn't all. Another thing that added to the calamitous garbage fire was Spotify's weird obsession with exclusive podcasts. Basically meaning that if you wanted to listen to more from the creators or, I guess, royal outcasts that you love, you would have to go to Spotify, which in theory seems like a logical, good idea. But if you're trying to become the dominant force in the industry, whilst also introducing a bunch of people to a new medium that many of them are not familiar with, why would you limit the scope of your potential listeners? It makes no sense. If I wanted to sell these mince pies, no matter however nightmarish they turned out, why would I limit myself to selling them outside the back of my Mazda at a McDonald's on Thursday night, when the whole world is out there to show my mediocre cooking? This move not only alienated potential listeners from even checking out the platform in the first place, but also reduced the already small pool of potential creators. Because again, if any of the hosts wanted to make a successful show, why would they limit themselves to one platform? This is the exact reason why Spotify's exclusive deal with the Obamas failed, and they got paid $25 million. Just like what happened earlier, you can see how successful this business strategy ended up being for Spotify. As reported by Rachel Jones for Fortune, they scrapped the whole idea, like I'm scrapping my eventual idea for an inevitable baking show, because clearly it's not my forte. I mean, look at those things. I'm clearly not getting a baking show anytime soon. The reason they look like that was because I used the wrong size cutter. Don't mock me. In the end of all of this, only a few of the podcasts that Spotify invested heavily in early on are still around, with the main two being the Joe Rogan Experience and Alex Cooper's Call Her Daddy. While Spotify may protest and post how investments in the podcast space open their eyes to new ways to make money, as shown by, I don't know, the fact that they tried to do this in the memo which announced that the person that was in charge of these decisions were leaving the company, it's just another in a long, continuous line of mistakes from a company that professes to be the industry leader in anything to do with audio. Simply put, they invested too heavily and eagerly in an industry that nobody knew much about, using tactics that would have worked several decades ago and expected to work again. And most hilariously, out of all of this, they did so at a time in recent history when people had nothing but time on their hands, looking for more and more content to consume. And they still messed it up. What is wrong with this company? On the 19th of March 2024, the Swedish newspaper outlet Dagens Nyheter released an article titled
Hemlig är kompositören bakom hundratals artistnamn, Sveriges mest lyssnade på Spotify.
Which detailed the story of local composer Johan Röhr. Although Röhr was a relatively unknown figure amongst a wide array of Swedish musical titans, would it shock you to know that he comfortably sits in the top 100 most streamed artists of all time on Spotify? I know I'm relatively musically inept, but I feel like I should know one track from someone who has more streams than Mariah Carey, especially in this time of year. I have a reindeer jumper on, for God's sake. The secret behind Röhr's success? Well, according to Dagens Nyheter and The Guardian, he was the man behind over 2,700 songs that had been released to the music streaming platform, racking up a total of 15 billion streams. Which sounds unbelievably impressive until you realise that he had done so under the guise of hundreds upon hundreds of fake aliases. But why? As I referenced all the way back at the start of the video, these individuals would release hundreds upon thousands of tracks under fake aliases with the intention of clogging up as many places on one of Spotify's most listened to verified playlists as they could. If you had the ability to supercharge those numbers by ensuring multiple places on a single playlist, those numbers would quickly ramp up, with this only being solidified by the type of music that each of these people made. Instrumentals. You could single-handedly populate entire playlists dedicated to sleep, relaxation, studying, and no one would be any the wiser if you were listening to a track from Minik Knudsen, Maya Eistrom, or Johan Röhr, and it wouldn't even cross your mind when listening to those that you had actually been listening to the same artist. Whilst Röhr may profess his innocence, with his record label stating diversely talented artists should be able to publish music across different artist names spanning various genres and vibes, at different points in their musical journeys. Like, okay, if Childish Gambino released a song as Donald Glover, I wouldn't be too shocked, because crucially, I know that they're the same person.
And I found one of his tracks on Spotify that had gotten 4 or 5 million plays.
Okay.
Then I found the same track on YouTube. It had 100 plays.
Right.
Well, wait a second. If this is such a great song,
right, exactly.
If everybody loves this song, why does it only get 100 plays on YouTube?
This practice wasn't exactly new to Spotify, with Röhr being unearthed as just another frosty mass on what was becoming an incredibly monstrous iceberg that had been plaguing Spotify for years. But there was a reason I called this platform the Titanic. This story was first broken by Tim Ingham back in August of 2016 for Music Business Worldwide. And get used to hearing those names for a brief moment, because you're about to become very familiar with them. It seems both of them have a little bit of a vendetta against Spotify. Timothy claimed that Spotify were instructing producers to create tracks typically without vocals, which fit certain genres and themes including jazz, chill and peaceful piano playing, in which producers would receive a flat fee but Spotify would hold on to the master copyright. Now, I have to say that Spotify came forward and denied many of the claims that were made here, but that didn't stop both Tim and the listeners of Music Business Worldwide from digging further and further into this, unearthing other fake artists like Deep Watch, Benny Bernstein and Karen Borg, among many others who had amassed well over 75 million streams. I know it's nowhere near the 15 billion from Johan, but this was 2017. Despicable Me 3 had only just come out. It was truly the dark ages. I don't know about you though, but I'm starting to get a little sense of deja vu. Populating relaxing playlists, holding onto the master copyright. Hang on a minute! This is the exact same thing they were pulling with the Wet Leaves debacle. This is not the first time they've tried it. They've honed their skills. What's even more peculiar about this whole situation is that there is a single common thread between a lot of the people involved in this scheme, such as Johan Röhr, who we met earlier, Andreas Romhand and Josef Svedlund, who were two of the producers that Timothy unearthed in 2016, and the record company Firefly, who had 830 of the fake artists under their umbrella. All of them were Swedish! You know, the exact same place that Spotify is from? And if we want to be even more specific, Johan, Andreas and Josef are all from Stockholm, the place where Spotify's headquarters is. Dagens Nyheter even reported that several important figures within Firefly have close ties to well-known Spotify executives. So it's not just an inside job, it's nepotism. I thought Sweden was supposed to be one of the happiest countries in the world, and this isn't making me feel very happy. Okay, I'm gonna calm down. I'm trying to be a serious documentarian in a Christmas jumper here. But that's besides the point. Again, I'm going to state that Spotify has refuted all of this. But it doesn't look good now that we have not one, not two, but 3 separate instances spanning many years of Spotify trying to do the same thing by manipulating their own monetization system for individual gain to hoard as many of the royalties for themselves.
Now, I can't prove that they are using Johann Röhr to avoid paying royalties to real musicians. But what other explanation can they be?
What would only make this whole situation so much worse is if we had, I don't know, a 4th example, a 5th example, a 6th example. Well, it is the festive time of the year, so how about a little surprise?
In Europe, we have laws that basically are such that the situation is totally blocked. And this is very unfortunate because we should exactly do that. We should be able to say, I want to take How Deep Is Your Love, I want to take a Beatles song, I want to take this and this song, and then I want to do something new with this. Currently, it's impossible. It's forbidden by law. And this is why, maybe one of the reasons why there is nothing, this is a statement here I'm doing, there is nothing interesting going on in composition with AI currently. Copyright issues, which are really a pain.
This is Francois Pache, an individual whose hiring by Spotify sort of went under the radar, mainly because it was released at the exact same time as Timothy introducing the world to the whole fake artist situation back in 2016 and 17. I'm sure it has nothing to do with that and the fact that one of their schemes to actually make money on their platform had been rumbled and they had to move to plan B. Definitely not. In the words of Guardian reporter Alexis Petridis, Pache was an expert in the application of artificial intelligence in the world of popular music, whose team last year released 2 songs entirely generated using AI. Oh my god! Now, I don't know how it's become a theme in my work that I continually have breakdowns about artificial intelligence, but I'm going to try and stay as level-headed as I can here. Whilst the sentence last year they released 2 songs entirely generated using AI may now send us into a collective tailspin, back in 2016 and 17, we weren't as broken to those 2 letters yet, so the public consensus was a lot more positive. Mr. Shadow and Daddy's Car were the names of those 2 aforementioned tracks, with this one getting way more attention in the eyes of the public, mainly because it was heavily inspired by the Beatles. Heavily inspired. Whereas Mr. Shadow got a lot more universal praise from the public and commenters, such as Lil Nas X. This has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm about to say here. I just think it's weird how quickly our opinions rightfully change about some things. And also, this was 2 years before Old Town Road was released, so we can give him some slack. If I were to describe some of these songs to you so I don't get a big fat copyright claim, I would go as far as to call them technically music. That's probably fair enough. Like, for me, they're not in the same league as those songs that just put Toad over a Frank Sinatra song and call it a day. They actually, in this instance, use human beings in the process of stealing other people's work. So, I guess that's progress. Pache has seemingly had several titles whilst working at Spotify, from Director of AI Research and Development to his current role as Director of Spotify's Creator Research Technology Lab. But throughout all of this, his overall goal has been seemingly consistent: to create software that allows more and more people to easily and effectively create music through the use of artificial intelligence. If a massive, huge, flickering siren, the same colour as my jumper, is not going off in your head at the moment, you have clearly not been listening. Historically, Spotify's main goal in life is to become a profitable application, and so far, they've been failing at it. But their current monetization system leaves too much up to chance, with labels, distributors, and songwriters taking away from what would be their potential profit margins. We've already seen numerous examples of Spotify trying to actively game their own monetization system by flooding their platform with slop that ultimately steals streams and revenue from people that actually deserve it. Although they may absolutely deny it, there is a obvious, mind-melting, earth-shatteringly simple through line that connects every single one of these so-called schemes. So obvious, I think Spotify could figure it out. And clearly, the introduction of AI music is just another attempt at it. If Spotify can get more and more users hooked on AI creation tools, this cesspool of depravity will muddy the waters for any upcoming musicians trying to break through to the surface, whilst taking streams and revenue away from the artists that gave Spotify their platform in the first place.
If you're an independent musician who wants to get their music onto Spotify, you have to go through a distributor. Now there's loads of these about. There's DistroKid, CD Baby, TuneCore, RootNote, it goes on and on and on. And how these work is you will either pay per upload or you will pay a monthly subscription, which is pretty fair. They're offering you a service that, quite frankly, involves a lot of technology, and also that you don't know how to do or set up yourself. Now, anyone who uploads music onto Spotify is instantly enrolled in the ability to be paid for their music, which is great if you're a legitimate artist. But if you are an AI artist, and let's imagine I did AI artist in massive air quotes, it's even better news. Playlisting works in a lot of different ways. Editorial playlists are set up by teams at Spotify themselves, and they will find music they like and pop them on. Anyone who uploads and distributes to Spotify has access to Spotify for Artists, where they can pitch their new singles to playlist editorial teams and hopefully get them onto playlists. Now this is run by an actual team of people. There's no AI generated picking there. It is done so rigorously, and it's done by people who have good taste. It's their job to do it. However, there are also these enhanced AI playlists. You might have seen them. They're called like For You. They'll just stream in some stuff that you might have heard of or haven't heard of but sounds pretty similar. By and large, I think this is a great thing. It's happened to me, it's happened to my music. For example, say you like a band like They Might Be Giants, or you like Elvis Costello. You put a bit of their music on, I might pop up in there because I'm pretty thematically similar, and it can be really helpful for other indie musicians to get their music out there if they have a specific sound or a specific style or even like a specific outlook on life. It works perfectly for that. However, if you are an AI artist, this can really play into your hands. Say you've generated a nice little piano piece that sounds like you could be hearing it on the Costa del Sol. You could have it over brunch, you could enjoy it with a cup of coffee in the morning. You upload this and you title it something like Super Relaxed Coffee Yoga Vibes. A lot of people on Spotify will just search for something like that, expecting to find a playlist made by a normal user. It's getting difficult to figure out what is AI music and what isn't these days. So half the time people will just listen to it and assume there's nothing wrong with it. And to be honest, consumers don't really mind that much if they can't tell the difference. But I can tell the difference. I can. This music then, to use a metaphor that might not work that well, feeds into the ecosystem. The ecosystem will then understand that, oh, this person's listening to this, we should recommend them that. Oh, this person's listening to that, we can loop this into here. Oh, this person's listening here, and it goes on and on and on and on and on until the AI song is being listened to by a huge number of people. This also kind of came to a head really recently with the Michael Smith case, where he was uploading loads of AI tracks and then creating a bunch of free Spotify accounts, having them listen to his tracks and putting them into playlists on a loop, and eventually through across all digital streaming providers, he made $10 million. This is called wire fraud and is incredibly illegal. Hopefully he's going to jail, because it really just denigrates the work that actual musicians who spend ages honing their craft and learning what to do and what an E major chord is. It really puts them to shame. And he's making $10 million off this kind of thing. There's also a rising trend at the moment targeting indie musicians with botted playlists. As playlists are the be-all and end-all of success on Spotify at the moment, some nefarious companies or individuals will set up playlists to be listened to by botted accounts, usually free Spotify accounts they've set up that will just sit and listen to songs that independent artists will pay for placement on that playlist, pretending that they'll be receiving a bunch of streams. If you're a musician, you want to get your music out to as many real people as possible, to get a continuation of your success, to feed into a fan group, to feed into your audience. What you want is people coming back who actually exist in the real world. If the number goes up and there's no one there to quantify it, it doesn't matter if the number goes up. And Spotify have also started cracking down on this. They have noticed. And if you are found using botted playlists like this, they'll remove your music from Spotify. They'll just do it. Never, ever pay for playlisting. It will ruin you. It's all very well and good having the number go up, but we saw how this went with NFTs and Bitcoin, and no one's actually listening to it. That number is going to come right back down, and you'll have no audience, and you'll be out $50. don't bother. Being a musician can be a bit of a punishing challenge. There's so much love that goes into the work and so little recognition that comes out of it. The reason anyone gets into music is because they love it. They're not trying to make a quick buck. They love expressing themselves. So here's my little tip. If you have a friend who's an artist, who makes music, who's pouring their heart and soul into something, support them. Add them to your playlists. Talk about them to your friends. Recommend their music to someone you think might like it. Support is the one best thing you can do for your friends who are independent musicians. And at the very least, they'll know you've got their back. That's all musicians want at the moment, is someone to have their back. And if the big companies aren't going to help, then it's up to us.
In another article for our pal Timothy Ingham from Music Business Worldwide, he recalls a story that he heard about Pache. He was apparently very clear. AI-written music inherently shouldn't require any royalties to be paid to copyright holders after it is published. This is the man that Spotify has put in charge of the entire division. If he doesn't think that songwriters, performers and rights holders require any sort of monetary kickbacks after their song is stolen by an artificial intelligence program, I'm going to imagine that the company agrees with him, because again, he's in charge of the entire division. And guess what? Daniel Ek, one of the two co-founders who actually speaks to the public, has said on numerous occasions that he sees a future for artificial intelligence in the world of music.
You have no immediate plans to ban AI-generated content from the platform?
No, we have no immediate plans. And in fact, it wouldn't even surprise me that if we look at the top chart of Spotify today, that there's a legitimate use of AI done by artists.
Presumably, a future where he makes a load of money and other people suffer. And even if that is not enough to convince you, look at Spotify's own platform rules in their safety and privacy center. That is it. The fact that there is so much wriggle room there, yet Spotify acknowledges that there is a problem with AI in music, judging by the fact that, I don't know, Daniel Ek said it in an interview with the BBC.
Our view is obviously that is not positive.
Leaves us with two options, and both of them do not look flattering. Either they do not care and want more content on their app, or, and this one is way worse, they are actively benefiting from this stuff, either from doing it firsthand or through third-party means. And whilst they constantly will dispute everything that I've spoken about so far, we have had so many examples that prove that otherwise. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me 84 times and I might go and get my iPod Shuffle out of my cupboard. Even in the past year, if any of you have been focusing on Spotify-centric news as much as I have, there has been an absolute explosion in the world of AI music on the site. From the mysterious rise to fame, then immediate sudden disappearance of Sophia Picture, as reported by Nando Cruz for El Diario, from countless Reddit posts of people unearthing fake AI rock cover bands with names like Gutter Grinders, Savage Sons, Jet Fuel and the Ginger Ale, and Grunge Growlers, which, as a side note, would have been some truly unreal names for a wrestling tag team from the late 90s. Besides from that though, their music's pretty tragic. I'm gonna say now, this is the only musical take you can actually take seriously from me, because as a tiny British lad plonked in the middle of nowhere whose only close friends growing up were sheep and blades of grass, you would not be able to fathom the sheer amount of terrible rock cover songs that I've listened to at every farmer, steam engine and folk festival in a random field near me. The only reason they're actually found out in the end is because their songs are tragically bad. But what if you could sneak your way into verified playlists, rack up crazy streams and still release terribly trash music? What then? In fact, one of the only artists that I found in the first playlist that came up when you searched jazz, called Jazz in the Background with nearly 2 million saves, had an actual bio.
Welcome. Baker Street provides you with the best new jazz in a classic style. We pack elegance and wit into a jazz trio format. Why is it always trios?
But even that sounded suspicious, so I looked into it more. Besides the fact that it's unbelievably difficult to find anything other than the banger from Jerry Rafferty or The Place, the only tangible link that I could find to this band was this page on last.fm, which showed these funky fellows, so I thought, okay, for once, it's actually genuine. but then I found something out. After reverse image searching this, it took me to the YouTube channel Baker Street Jazz Band with around 440 subscribers, and it hasn't been posted on in 8 years. Apart from that though, I couldn't help but notice two glaringly obvious things. One, they had vocals in it, it's not very instrumental. And two, for a trio, they had quite a lot of members. So either they've had a massive fallout since then because members of the band wanted to go in drastically different directions to the point that now they are a trio that only makes instrumental background music. Or, more likely, it is another fake band that shares the same name as something else. And this is coming from someone who has the exact same name as someone more famous, more funny, and more talented than I will ever be. I will overtake you one day, Henry Lewis.
Don't stream it. I mean, you can stream it, whatever, but don't.
We get it. We get it.
I think Spotify, YouTube Music and things like that, I think they're really brilliant platforms for music. Platforms for music to live on indefinitely.
If you want to see us make another one,
maybe buy a signed album.
The streaming services, the songs diminish quicker. Like, let's say you consume a song and we all listen to it at midnight, it dies off quicker now because of streaming. There's so much access to more music.
there's no moment around it. You don't get to appreciate it as a moment.
As consumers, we find ourselves in quite a tricky position. Even whilst I'm writing and now filming this video, I'm still completely infuriated and awestruck by what I've been reading so far. I don't know what to do. I'm not going to jab at any of you out there who disagrees with what I've said, or more importantly, continues to use Spotify. That wasn't my aim when making this video. I just wanted to highlight the reality of the situation we find ourselves in. All along, this was Spotify's plan. They presented us with an offer that was too good to turn down, and then when they reached a point of critical mass, they were going to raise prices and gouge not only individuals, but artists for everything that they're worth. They've turned music into one of the lowest valued forms of art, and that is coming from one of the record label CEOs again. Every song has the nourishment of a snack rather than a fully fledged meal. As soon as you finish one, you're immediately thinking about the next release and the next release rather than focusing on the meal that you have in front of you. And again, all along, this was Spotify's plan. It's what they encouraged and continue to encourage and promote now. If I still haven't convinced you that the people that run this platform are truly evil beings with no passion or background in the music industry, I'm going to waffle at you one more time with another example. And unlike the rest of them, it actually has a lot of super long words and numbers, which my greatest fear. So I'm actually going to be looking off over here so I don't quote it wrong. And as always, I'm going to have put probably a quote like source credit down here, and the articles that I use where I'm actually speaking out the quotes will be linked in the description, probably underneath Jack Ferry. This is coming from a guest column published on Billboard a few days before my birthday earlier this year from Adam Parnes. I don't know why I need to tell you that. To talk about something that he thought was an incredibly pressing matter, and I think we should take him seriously because he was previously Spotify's global head of music publishing. Parnes goes on to detail how in recent months Spotify had worked to reclassify its premium individual and family subscription services as bundled subscription services, whilst also raising the price from $9.99 a month to $10.99 a month. Whilst from an outside perspective, it seemed as though their reasoning for doing this was so they could include 15 hours of their new product, audiobooks, the reality was a lot more Spotify. In 2022, thanks to the conclusion of Phono Records 4, which was basically like a legal battle disputing how much royalties and revenue the songwriters and distributors deserved, Spotify's revenue share rate went from 15.1% to 15.35% over a 5-year period, allowing discounts under very specific circumstances. In the grand scheme of things, this raise was seemingly not the end of the world, as rights holders and musicians would finally start getting paid more for the work that they deserve to be paid more for, and Spotify wouldn't have to fork over untold amounts of money, which is, I guess, always their goal in life. But again, Spotify was still Spotify. The special circumstances that allowed for discounts that I mentioned earlier effectively detailed that bundled services provided by the digital streaming service would qualify for a lower percentage of revenue share, shifting the amount owed from 15.35 to less than 12%. So Spotify was now trying to say that all of its offerings qualified for the lower revenue share rate because, crucially, they included 15 hours of audiobooks a month and cost $1 more, and therefore would qualify for the lower payment threshold, simply because Spotify had to pay 0.25% more for artwork they do not own. In Parnell and Billboard's words, this could be upwards of an $150 million loss on a yearly basis for songwriters and publishers. Parnell mentions that Spotify states that they've paid a record amount to publishers and societies in 2023, but how does that detract from what you are currently trying to do? If you paid someone £5 for something one year and then £6 the next year for the exact same thing, you may try and profess how you're being high and mighty. But if you know deep down that the product that you are buying for £6 is worth £45 million, you don't have a fucking moral high ground to stand upon. They are simply trying to drastically reduce the amount of money that goes to the people that deserve it, whilst also overstating their importance and simultaneously trying to offset massive losses from overinvestment in podcasting. In their own words, if our business does not perform as expected, or if the rates are modified to be higher than the proposed rates, our content acquisition costs could increase, impacting our ability to obtain pricing terms favourable to us, which could negatively harm our business, operating results, and financial condition. This was a statement from Spotify in 2018 in that SEC report I mentioned ages ago. It wasn't like a spur of the moment terrible decision that they made to bundle all of their services. The writing has been on the wall since 2018. They've been scheming since then. But what now? This was supposed to be my festive, happy Christmas video. I've even got a funky jumper on, but I feel like this has gotten a lot more depressing than my videos normally do. But I do think there is one shining mote of happiness that we can take from this, and you may not believe me and think I'm joking, but it's the fact that Spotify clearly cannot run a business well and won't be around for much longer anyway. We've only got to survive like a little bit more. Take it from Timmy Preble, we just have to wait a cool 100 years. I'm sure I'll still be around then. But seriously, since I've been alive, there have been numerous revolutions in the music industry in terms of how we listen and consume it. I'm sure it won't be long until there's another one, especially with all the anger and resentment bubbling up to the surface. Although awful tech companies like Spotify and all the other music streamers continue to suck the joy out of the medium in which they make their money from, changing the way we not only listen but consume music in general, there's nothing that I can do or say that will have an impact against these monsters. Again, my plan wasn't for me to release this video and then tomorrow Spotify crumbles into the Swedish cesspool it came from. But at this time of year in particular, I think it's on us to change our relationships towards the medium and not be so heavily reliant upon these hallmark-looking Swedish supervillains that are trying to decide what we like and are trying to make those decisions for us. So continue to make what you feel passionate about. Go see your favourite musicians live, support them in any way that you can, and maybe even buy physical media for once. And this is coming from a man who just bought his first CD since 2010. Oh god, do I even have a CD player anymore? What about the AA batteries? Oh, that was a lot of words. If any of you are still listening out there, thank you. And whilst we're on the positivity train here, I just want to say a massive thank you to all of you out there. This has been a mental year for me, starting off with around about 200 subscribers with my most viewed video having 5,000 views, to now well over 18,000 subscribers, and I've just hit 1 million total channel views. It's been a little bit of a weird year. This is going to be my last video of the year, hence the Christmas jumper, but I promise to be back next year in 2025 with a bang. I hated that as much as you hated hearing that. I've got so many bigger and better video ideas in the pipeline, or should I say the notes section of my phone, and hopefully not all of them will just be me waffling about the current state of the world and how I hate it. I actually want positivity for once, and also I need to stop saying waffling. You tell me I say it too much. Oh yeah, whilst I'm here and whilst I'm wearing this, for those of you who celebrate it, Merry Christmas, and for those of you that don't celebrate it, I wish you an equal amount of joy and happiness for the end of the year, and also I guess Happy New Year's. You can come back and play those messages on those days if you want. I also just want to say a special thank you to Orlando Man, who somehow managed to find my Patreon before I even posted about it. And also Adam D.Y. Ross, who has also subscribed to my Patreon as I'm finishing editing this, hence what I look like now. So I got to say his name out loud, so thank you for that. And as a final Christmas festive December-y surprise, I have a present for you. So why don't you open it?